Hi there guys, and welcome to the final lesson on this course. We're going to finish the actual illustration. I'm going to do my own and you can follow the steps, but you can at the same time use a design of your own, of whatever you want. With the techniques and tools I've given you throughout the course, you can create your own Christmas illustration. The first thing we're going to do is start the composition with some simple blocking lines. This line I've placed here indicates where my penguin is going and where the presents are going. I'm going to make basic geometric shapes to start with the sketch. I recommend you start with very simple ellipses, just as we learned in the penguin lesson. The ellipses and basic shapes will help you get the perfect sketch. And use movement lines as well if you need to. For the boxes, if you're going to make boxes or any other kind of object, then I recommend that you make prisms. See how we use the perspective in this image. We established 2 vanishing points, and one of those is outside of the canvas, but we can still guess where it is. From here we need to draw the line to establish what views of the box will be visible and which ones won't be seen, depending on where they're placed on the horizon line. If you're not sure how to do this still, then go back to the previous lesson on perspective. Practice a few times making different boxes, and then you'll be ready to compose the scene. As you see, I have quite a complex composition made up of different boxes. I need to apply perspective to each one of them because I need to imagine where the remaining vanish point is. But if you're drawing on paper, you can draw outside of the page on another sheet, and you could use sticky tape to join them. Finally, I'll add some small details to the penguin. We'll simply sketch at this stage, and we'll go into more detail later on. Now I'm going to draw the polar bear. I'll draw the bear with the same lines and shapes that we learned in the basic cartoon lesson. As I'm going to draw 2 small penguins on top, I'll use the ellipses again to make the shape for each penguin. You might have noticed I've made the drawing of the bear on a separate layer. This is because I'd like to be able to change the composition whenever I want. The relation between the main element, which is the penguin and the boxes, and the bear is the 2 penguins. As you see, I keep moving them until they're where I like them. That's why we did a previous composition study. Now I'm going to add some decorative elements on top of the boxes, like snowballs, candy canes, just small details that add to the scene. It might be nice to put something on the ground too. The amount of detail you add depends on your own style of drawing. Maybe simple works better for you, or a richer illustration. It depends. I'm showing you my own cartoon style, and that's why I'm following these particular steps, but you can do it differently if you prefer. Once I've added all the details to the gifts, I'll lower the opacity of the layer so I can work on a new one on top and continue drawing with more detail. The drawing I'm going to do here on top will be the definitive one that will then ink, so I need the detail to be properly drawn. The structures have to be perfect, so that means in the previous drawing we needed to place all the basic lines correctly. Now we just have to focus on applying the details and solving any problems that we might have. I'll add a bit of texture to some areas. I like to do this because I think it enriches the illustration. The creases, textures, fabric, it all adds to the design. Even adding small details like patterns or designs to the clothes or the gifts. This just makes your illustration more detailed and special. Once we've finished the drawing, it's time for the line art. For this, we need to merge the sketch layers and then lower the opacity of the layer. Now we can start the line art. I'll use the same brush I used for the sketch, but I'll increase the opacity to 100%. You can use whatever brush you like depending on what kind of stroke you want. This could be cleaner or rougher, it depends on your taste. There are artists that sketch with one type of brush, then ink with another. But I like to do everything with the same brush. I think this way I get a rougher stroke that makes my drawing more interesting. But as I said, it's really up to you and what you prefer. My style of doing the line art is I make the outside lines thicker and the inside ones thinner. It's like making a cutout of the image and getting a kind of sticker. In a way, we're separating some elements from others. So the main elements will have a thicker line, and the secondary ones will have a finer line. And it always goes from the outside in. This is the way that I work, but you could do it differently. There are many artists who, for example, ink everything the same way, or vary it depending on the areas of light and shadow. Sometimes they use a thicker line for the shadows, and a thinner one for the light areas. You can experiment with all of these things. You could take a simple sketch and do 3 or 4 different types of line art. And this way you could discover a style that you like and that you can follow and develop in your own illustrations. That's exactly what I did when I started out, and nowadays I think I have my own personal way of doing the line art for my designs. It's always nice for the line to be shaped, so to speak. So in some areas it could be thicker than others, as I said before. Even one same line could start thicker and end thinner. All this is really to help you enrich the ink of the drawing. Again, you can do it in your own way, but it's good to try these kind of techniques just to see how your designs look. If you observe my drawings, the inside lines of the details aren't the same as the ones on the outside, like the stars. Everything has its own volume. Okay, I've zoomed forward a bit so you don't get bored watching me outline all the details. But see how I've drawn a thinner line on the bear than the penguin? That's because the polar bear is more in the background, so it's not as important as whatever is in the foreground, which is our penguin and presents. So remember that when we planned the composition, we decided on the main element and the secondary one. And the main one, as I said, is the penguin, and the bear is the secondary element. So this is also important in the line art phase. So the elements that are further away are generally drawn with a finer line. We'll also apply this principle to the colour phase. We're trying to express what's closer and what's further away. Our eyes interpret thicker lines for something that's closer and thinner ones for an object that's further away. Now I'm going to use a trick I like a lot when inking a drawing, and that is to draw very small, fine lines all over the illustration. It's sort of like adding some noise. I like to use previous sketch lines to make these. And what I do is follow some of the strokes in the sketch layers and go over them with small points and lines. This is a trick that you can use, or not. It's just for aesthetic purposes, but personally, I really like it. There are other aesthetic tricks you could use. Just try out different things and see what you like. You can use other artists as reference to see how they apply the line art and even copy their style. This way you can learn to come up with your own style. Okay, now that we have everything outlined, we can apply the colour. So to begin with, we need a base. I'm going to create a new layer underneath the ink layer, and then I'm going to select a base colour for the whole drawing. I'm going to do it as if it were a kind of mask or silhouette of the whole drawing. I'll select the colour that I want to be dominant in the whole design, and I'll paint everything in that colour. Pay special attention to the borders, as I would like the borders to be perfectly outlined, so I'll paint very carefully. What we'll do now is separate all the colours into different layers. We'll then subordinate each layer to the bottom layer. So each colour we apply doesn't go over the lines, we need to subordinate the layers to one another. So the new ones we create need to be subordinated to the base layer. And we can do that by pressing Alt plus the new layer, and this becomes linked to the base layer. You'll see that an arrow appears and the layer moves slightly to the right. So just do this with the colour layers that you want so that you don't paint over the lines. Something you need to bear in mind is that the new layers we make on top of others will be superimposed on the ones beneath. So this means that when we paint the lower layers, you won't see the part where we go out of the lines. So this could be a good idea so you don't always have to pay attention to the exact limits of the lines. It's good to think about which layers should go above and which ones should go below. It's just another way of simplifying your workload. Okay, let's try and make it so the colours contrast each other. So if it were in black and white, we would still see each part differently. We need to be able to understand each part of the drawing separately. This is really important. If it helps, you can desaturate all the image to see how everything looks in black and white. You don't really need to worry about harmonising the colours at this stage. It's great if you can, but we will apply a filter to the image anyway to unify it and harmonise the colour range. Even so, as I said, if you're capable, then you could make sure the colours work well together now. All the better. What I'll do now is place the bear in the background. I'll select all the paint layers I used for the polar bear and create a new layer on top that I'll paint in blue. The same blue that we have for the body of the bear. Then I'll lower the opacity and the bear looks like it's more in the background. And you can see how the penguin now stands out a lot more. Now I'm going to apply some gradients. You can use the gradient tool inside the paint bucket tools. Select all the base, and with a new colour, make lines from one side to the other so we get that gradient. To apply the filter, create a new hue and saturation layer, select Colorize, and what we'll do is vary the colour we want and lower the opacity of the layer. This way, as you see, all the colours have harmonised into one colour range. It is easier to do it like this. Although it's still nice to select the appropriate colours from the beginning and not to use a filter, and go straight for saturated and neutral colours. Now I'll create some shadow using a new layer in multiply mode. What we'll do on this layer is choose a purple colour and apply this to the areas of shade we want on our drawing. We do need to establish a light source. I want the light source to be in the top right-hand corner. So the shadows that I apply to the penguin and the bear will be in the bottom left. After applying all the shadows, we'll lower the opacity of this layer so we can see how it really looks. And see how nice the shading looks. Now we're going to apply a light layer. To do this, create a new layer and set it to hard light. Use a lighter colour like this light purple and apply it softly to the areas where the light is strongest. When using lights, be careful not to make them too saturated, so it's not too bright. With the eraser, you can shape the areas of light and shadow so they look nicer. The next thing I'm going to do is paint the line of the polar bear. So I'll paint the line art for the bear so that it's a little more focused, although it still is in the background. I'll go to the line layer and lock the pixels. Then I'll select a darker tone than the pink and I'll paint all the line layer. See how the perspective of the drawing changes like this? Now we can see the penguin even closer and the bear seems to be further away. And this is what we want. The last thing we need to finish the drawing is to create a layer underneath the base in multiply mode. Again, I'll select a purple tone and paint a cast shadow for each of the characters. With the eraser, go over some areas to shape the shadow and make it more aesthetic. Of course, after this, we can lower the opacity so everything is a bit more balanced. Finally, I'll create a hue and saturation layer and I'll add some saturation to the drawing. This way the colours stand out a lot more. You just need to move the bar here of the tone and saturation. And with that, our illustration is finished. Now you can create your own Christmas illustration following the same steps that we did here. I hope you enjoyed the course and you found it useful for your own illustrations. Remember that you can upload your own work to the project section of the course on TutPad so that the students and tutors can see what you've come up with. And I'll see you next time for another TutPad course. Bye!